I was doing some sold comparable research recently on a vacuum part that I've sold in the past, and I have another one on hand that I was getting ready to list. So as I was going through the active listings, I came across something that caught my eye. It looked like my sold listing was active again. When I took a closer look, I realized that those were definitely my images, but that was not my listing. Someone had taken it upon themselves to steal my images for their listing. And my first thought was, wait a minute, you cannot do that. That is absolutely stealing. That is not okay. Give me my item back. Take that listing down. Until I learned how eBay handles cases like this. And at first glance, you are not going to believe any of this. So in this video, we're going to talk about what eBay's policy is regarding using images, video, and text, and the sharing of these elements. We're also going to talk about if there are any ways that us as sellers can combat this practice and prevent it from happening in the future. And then I'm going to give my opinion on this policy because it creates a ton of conflicts of interest, especially when you consider what eBay expects and wants for its buyers on their platform and what they could potentially get in return when they receive an item that looks materially different than the one in the images. So stay tuned. The first thing we need to do is establish what eBay's policy actually is regarding the use of images, video, and text. So I'm going to read a portion of it verbatim. So it is, when you create listings, you give eBay and its customers permission through our user agreement to use your images, videos, and product details. Your content may be added, and when they say maybe, it's like going to be added, to the product catalog, and it may be used by other sellers in their eBay listings. Now, the policy does clarify that you have to have the ownership rights in the first place. You can't use somebody else's and then try to pass them along as your own, even though you don't get any protection here anyway, so that kind of doesn't matter. So even though you took the photo, meaning you own the copyright, you're essentially loaning those rights out to eBay for the right for them to use it in the catalog. And when it becomes part of eBay's catalog, other sellers may legally use those images in their listings. So it essentially at that point becomes a shared resource. So I'm going to show you stacked up against each other two active listings. The one on the bottom is very clearly me and my listing, and the one on the top is not my listing, but they are most certainly my pictures. So my first question naturally would be, okay, this is perfectly legal for all sellers to do, but is there a way for us as sellers to combat the practice if we just kind of don't like or appreciate what's going on? One of the biggest misconceptions, and I see this advice given out a lot, is to use sort of a branded watermark in your photos. But if you look at eBay's picture policy, they strictly prohibit watermarks of any kind in their images. So if you're getting that advice, please do not follow that advice. I'm going to read a portion of the picture policy here in a minute because it's sort of funny as it relates to all of this image sharing. And I feel like we know sort of deep down why this practice is potentially bad, because it sounds like it could create more INAD, or is not as described, returns than it probably should, but eBay has no way to police that. I'll get to that in a second, but let's read a portion of the picture policy just so we can kind of get an idea of how big of a conflict we're talking about. The policy says, photos are one of the most important parts of your listing because they allow potential buyers to see the items, and I quote, exact condition, unquote, and help them decide whether to bid or buy. They recommend using more than one image to help increase the chance of a successful sale. So we get all of that, but I hear words coming out of this side of the mouth now, and I hear words coming out of this side of the mouth now. So it's okay to share images where the item could potentially look very different than the one the buyer receives. But here in the picture policy, eBay is saying, we want to see the item's exact condition, so your pictures are of the utmost importance. Okay, well, what is it, eBay? I don't think we can have it both ways. This is why we can't have nice things. And to be totally honest, like, do I, on a personal note, want to be associated with a seller I don't know? I mean, for goodness sakes, like, what if they ship this in a Pringles container? Like, I don't want to be associated with that at all. It's just going to create a terrible experience potentially for the buyer. So it sounds like this really needs to be cleaned up. What you cannot do is put watermarks in your pictures. So as far as actual solutions go, I don't think there is any. And quite honestly, like, I'm not deep down offended. You know, it's potentially flattering. I don't know if that's even the right term for me to use, but it's certainly at a minimum sort of lazy to do if the item is in used condition. If it's a newer item and it comes in packaging we're all familiar with, like the Exploding Kittens board game, right? We all know what that looks like. We all know what a sealed box looks like. If somebody used another image where the thing is exactly sealed, you can almost be certain that the item that the buyer is going to end up receiving is that exact item in that exact condition with the sealed cellophane wrapped around it. If we're talking about pre-owned items, there's so many different conditions. That's why I think the policy probably needs to be refined. So I'm going to get into a few more things regarding why this creates such a big conflict and why it's just a terrible idea. All right, so reason number one on why I think this policy needs to be refined is, let's use my example and say somebody purchases that vacuum part. Okay, fair enough. They get it. It looks different than the images. They file an INAD, does not match the description or the photos. The seller naturally is going to be on the hook for the shipping for that item. They're going to have to take it back. eBay is a very buyer-friendly platform, so they're going to get refunded. They're not going to have to be responsible for the shipping. But the issue also is eBay doesn't have a way to track why exactly this happened. Well, it was very clear that because the images they were using were not their own, but eBay doesn't have a way to track or police any of that, right? So that's problem number one, is they just don't, there's no infrastructure on the back end for them to manage an INAD. And I'm gonna assume that they don't care. This probably is not an issue that they think could potentially become a problem. I'm going to show you next how it could become a real issue for them, and that would force them to address it. But just on a smaller scale, if that buyer buys that item, it's INAD, you get the refund. eBay doesn't have the exact reason why, and it doesn't look like, based on the policy alone, that they care about that reason. I think they should, because issue number two that I'm going to address right here is the bigger problem. So issue or scenario number two is, what if it just becomes a complete free-for-all and all of us start using and sharing each other's images? Imagine what would happen, and imagine the amount of is not as described returns they would get flooded with. It's at that point that they would be forced to make a decision. And that's why I think, taking the initiative and changing this before any of that worst case scenario stuff happens makes sense, especially when we're talking about pre-owned condition, pre-owned goods. I think this is an issue that needs to be addressed way more than the condition changes that they made with now it's pre-owned excellent, pre-owned good, pre-owned fair. I thought backburning that would make more sense, and then policing something like this, because think about that worst case scenario. If we all just start sharing each other's images and photos, it would be a complete mess, and it totally flies in the face, again, of the buyer experience that eBay is trying to create, right? We know just how buyer friendly that platform is. It's not exactly the most seller-friendly platform if we're comparing it to how they treat and handle buyers. So in a worst-case scenario, this would be a total disaster for eBay. So why not fix a few things, just refine some of these policies, and give you both your sellers and your buyers a little bit more clarity when it comes to sharing images. It just, in like the Armageddon scenario, that would be a complete disaster. And then there's scenario number three. On a smaller scale, I'm a content creator, and maybe I have a small amount of influence when it comes to eBay. I don't necessarily want my images attached to somebody else because there's some brand recognition there. And again, like, what if somebody confuses me with that seller? That's going to create, that creates an issue on a smaller scale for somebody with some recognition like myself. In fact, I remember very specifically somebody sending me an email through eBay saying, hey, I just wanted to say, I love your channel. I was doing sold comparable research on an item, and I totally recognized your images. People recognize that the back deck that I take the majority of my pictures on. So there is some recognition there, and I don't want to be associated with a seller that is borrowing my images. And again, it's flattering. It's somebody here locally. It's not the first time that it's happened. I've seen it before, like I said, let's just leave those people alone. They're not doing anything wrong. So, but I don't necessarily love that. And yes, I could very kindly reach out to that seller and say, hey, could you not do that? I think that that's probably just a waste of my time and energy. So it's like eBay's, we're going to allow you guys to just use everybody else's pictures. It's no problem. But like, please don't do it a lot. That's kind of what this feels like, right? And that feels wishy-washy to me. And so, I mean, there's, I think, 3 examples where this probably needs to be worked on. And it's amazing that we are in 2025 and there's no real solution to it. New sealed images and sharing, that's a different discussion that makes a little bit more sense. But when we're talking about all of the different conditions, and eBay is guilty of it themselves, right? Now we've got pre-owned excellent, we've got pre-owned good, we've got pre-owned fair. They created specific condition categories because they know they vary and it's important. So why not also address it with your image and your picture policy? And it says right there, like, those exact images are super important. Well, if they are, why are we allowing everybody to share? That doesn't make sense. Okay, so with all of that said, very long-winded, I suggest, if you are a seller and you want to be a seller and you want to have longevity on this platform, in 99.9% of the cases, I would even venture to say 100, just don't use other images in your listings. It's a bad practice. Again, at a minimum, it's lazy. At worst, it creates a terrible potential experience for the buyer. I'm super against it. I understand that eBay, this sounds really liberal, but again, it's conflicting, right? There's a lot of conflicts of interest going on here right from their own words. So I just suggest that if you're considering doing it, if you can avoid it at all costs, just don't do that. The images are very clearly important, and it does take some thought and some time and effort into doing them. Don't use other people's images. Create your own way, take your own photos, create your own listings, do the absolute best that you can do. And usually when that happens, good results come. So I think it's time for eBay to refine this practice. I would love to know in the comments if somebody has used your images in a listing before and how you handled it. You don't have to give all of the details if maybe it wasn't the best response. But I'm not going to reach out to anybody. It really doesn't matter to me. But I wanted to make this video as just sort of like an awareness thing. Don't use watermarks, and it's perfectly legal if somebody is using your images. Let me know if it's happened to you, and if you think any of these suggestions make sense moving forward. That's all I've got for you. Thanks so much for watching. And if you want to see more videos like this, as always, please subscribe to the channel, and we'll catch you in the next one.